Resco Radio Talk. Hello everyone, your host Ivan Stano here. I have the great pleasure of welcoming Sam Klaidman back to the show today. Sam is the founder and principal advisor at Middlesex Consulting. He applies the methodologies and techniques associated with the customer value creation and service marketing professions. Sam joined the Resco Radio Talk just recently to talk about how to hire for attitude and train for skill. This time, we're going to talk about the outcomes-based service. Sam, welcome again. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me back. It's fun. Last time I really enjoyed myself, so I'm looking forward to this.
Same here. I think the last episode was a great success. It's up on YouTube as a video and as a podcast episode on all the podcast platforms, so everybody can tune into this one. But today we're going to talk about something a little different, right? Outcomes-based service. And I tried to study a little bit about the topic over the last few days and the weekend to make sure that I'd be a little bit prepared to pick your brain the best I can. And one interesting fact I found out, and I would love to hear your opinion on that and what you see in the industry and what companies are doing. It seems like a lot of service businesses across a variety of industries, geographies, but also sizes are becoming very servitization or customer-centric. Do you see companies trying to rethink the customer-centric business model around services rather than products?
That's a big question.
I know.
Okay.
Let's throw the big one in there and then we can see where it goes.
Okay. So before we do that, let me ask you a question. Why do people and companies buy products and services? And if it takes too long, I'll answer for you.
I can think of a few reasons.
Okay, give me one.
If there's a need, right? There's a requirement to have it.
Right, that's one.
Then there are certain love brands, right? People love to buy from companies who they believe in.
Right.
Possess certain values that they associate with. Companies, sometimes because of the reputation.
Okay, but that's why they buy from that company. Mm-hmm. So the first question is, why do they buy? And you're right, it's because they have a need, but there's more to it than that. It's they have a need and they can find a place that offers a solution at a price that at the end of the process gives them a net profit. So it's the need and it's the price. And that's why companies buy things, and that's why people buy things. We buy a car because we have to go to work. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, and now we buy a bicycle for that or a Peloton. But that's the way it works. And they buy from companies, specific companies, because they have the best offer. So they create the most value, but the value is not totally monetary. A lot of it is emotional. So that's where it's the companies that they like to buy from because they have a relationship, because they feel confident that they're going to get what they paid for, those kind of things. But at the end of the day, people are buying because they have a need. They have to get something done. Mm-hmm. And that's the premise behind outcome-based selling, outcome-based service, mm-hmm. is that if you had a need, let's say you were an Uber driver and you needed a car. Well, you don't need the car initially. You need it to last maybe a couple of 100,000 miles. Maybe you needed to keep running and helping them generate income for a couple of years. And that's where the world has gotten to today. It used to be that people buy products and don't really think, and then they maybe turn it over to some other guys in a factory who have to use it. But today, the people that are buying the products and services are thinking about, I'm buying it because I need to achieve this outcome. And it's more than a one-off situation in general. You know, I'm going to buy a lathe because my business has grown and I have one metal cutting lathe and I'm outgrowing it. I have too much work, so I need to buy another one that will cut steel, aluminum, titanium, and whatever else. And I know that I'm going to amortize it over 7-year life. So it's got to make money for me over that 7-year life.
Mm-hmm.
And as people that are in the buy side think about things like that, that brings the service to the forefront. As the buyer says, it's more than just an instantaneous decision. It's a long-term, I need to use this for a long time. That's where the services come in. And that's what's going on in the world today.
Mm-hmm. So would you say there's some kind of a more of a long-term commitment, not just to the product, but the overall value?
Yes. And that's the right word. It's the long-term commitment to help the buyer achieve the long-term value that they believe they paid for.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's really going on.
Yeah, makes sense. I tried to look up the definition of the outcomes-based service. And this is what I found. You can tell me if you agree or if you would add something. And I think it has to do with a lot of things that you already touched on in the intro. So this very smart website describes it as the act of restructuring service contracts to focus on desired and provable outcomes rather than warranty, maintenance, and break fix.
That's clearly a major part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But really, the outcome-based stuff, the way people think about it today is it's a combination of the product and its capabilities tied in with data collection, data analysis, and using the data to ensure that these long-term needs are met.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to point out that the data is definitely something I thought about and would love to bring into our conversation at a little later stage. But that's what I figure out as well when I was reading about it.
Yeah. I mean, because today most products and the services associated with it are installation, training, warranty support, spare parts, maybe field service engineers, maybe some really break crisis. Maybe there's midlife upgrades. But today it's gone to the point where companies are also concerned about the environment. And so one of the services that a lot of companies are now offering is returning the material and doing an upgrade, do a swap out for a new one and take the old one, break it down for spare parts or upgrade it and sell it as a used machine. But that's all part of that servitization, outcome-based methodologies.
Mm-hmm. Could we give maybe some good examples of outcomes-based service so that it can resonate with our listeners and viewers a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, the classic one, and this is probably the first company that ever created this concept, was RollsRoyce aircraft engines back in the 1960s when a British company called Hawker Siddeley made business jets. And that was really early days. And because Hawker Siddeley was concerned about how am I going to sell it and how do I position it and how do I overcome the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that the business buyer has, they got RollsRoyce came up with a concept called power by the hour. So instead of just saying, hey, we stick it on the plane, and when it breaks, you go into your operator and they take it apart and fix it. They say, no, we're not going to sell you the engine. We're going to put it on the plane and charge you a fixed amount for every hour that it's generating thrust, flying, or a much smaller amount for every hour that it's capable of delivering the thrust, and you just don't want to use it. So that's the very first example.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. The one that I kind of like as well is the MRI machines in the hospitals.
Yep.
Where the hospitals are not really interested in buying the MRI machine and then certain number of service appointments and spare parts and service, like work on the machine, right? All they care about is a functional machine that's going to help them diagnose the patients and ultimately save lives. And they want that machine to be working rather than caring about, oh, do I need to have the technician come 10 times every month or 20 or, like 50 times per year? I care about the uptime, right?
Right. And they care about the uptime, and they also care about when the downtime occurs. Because here in America, one of the things that happened over the last 15 years is that Medicare, which is the largest health insurer in the country, they started rating hospitals and physicians not only on the outcomes of the person came to visit, did he die or live, but they survey the customers, the patients, and say, how satisfied are you? And the thing that really got patients really annoyed was when they came in, they had an appointment for mammogram, a radiation treatment, a CAT scan, and they go down and like here in New England, half the year it seems like it's cold and wintry, and so they go and they show up, and there's a sign on the door, no CAT scans today, machine broken.
Mm-hmm.
And that killed their satisfaction. So even if there was a fiscal penalty for doing it the way they're doing it, as you pointed out, they would still do it because there's the intangible customer sat rating, which ultimately affects how much the government pays for that person to provide the service to the patients.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really the uptime. They don't care. Hospitals don't care unless they're in the emergency room, but they don't care about a machine being worked on at night when there's no patients coming in. But they certainly care about it during the day when they're scheduled. So it's all that comes together to provide the outcomes that the hospitals promised. Mm-hmm. We will give you an unambiguous X-ray or an unambiguous CAT scan. When we schedule the appointment, you come in and you're going to have it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And this is a good one. I like it, and thanks for explaining it in detail, because I think I'm going to remember much easier the story of RollsRoyce and the MRI machines in hospitals than the very on-point definition of the outcomes-based service, right? It just sticks in our minds much easier.
Good.
So if we move on a little bit, I found out certain areas that outcome-based services businesses pay a lot of attention to. And I wanted to hear your ideas about these. I found out 4. Mm-hmm. And what's your take on their role to achieve like a fully successful outcomes-based service model, right? And first one is performance metrics. So probably companies are measuring how efficient their service is and how costly it is, and create some metrics around that. Would that be kind of in line of the first area?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's not, well, yes, you're right. But let me go back and make another point, a really basic point that I thought about earlier and I forgot. But the story is that there was a guy named Levitt, Theodore Levitt, who was a professor of marketing at Harvard Business School. And he was one of the gurus of business marketing. And he once went to a luncheon at the New York Ad Association, and somebody was talking about how they figured out a way to market drills, the drill bits. And one of the things that this guy snuck into the conversation was, nobody wants to buy a drill bit. They want holes. And he got really specific. He said, nobody wants to buy a 1/4-inch drill. Everybody wants a 1/4-inch hole. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the right definition of outcomes. And that's the way we have to train ourselves to think about things. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the outcome is not uptime. The outcome is making the product that I bought the machine to do at the rate that I bought it to create, and at the quality level that was promised to me by the manufacturer. Right? Those are the things, those are what they care about. Mm-hmm. And there's a measurement for that. It's called OEE, Overall Equipment Effectiveness. And that's been in use since the 1970s, and those encompass what you said, but that's the formal way. But they're not looking at uptime. They're looking at how many widgets came off that machine in the last 8 hours. That's the outcome. Mm-hmm. The uptime is the tool, the method, the methodology that got me to what I was trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. Yes, but overall, that's the concepts. Yes. Mm-hmm. So to get there, they measure things like uptime and utilization and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I found 4 areas. So the performance metrics is one of them.
Yep.
I found the asset uptime that you just explained and described.
Right.
Then I found the time to service. Right. So probably like how complex the machines are. And the 4th one is fail rate.
Right. But that's from the manufacturer and the service side. Mm-hmm. Right. And what I'm trying to do is talk about from the customer side. Mm-hmm. Because the service side is absolutely, those 4 and others are perfect, but you always got to think about the customer. And by the way, in that list, there's one other thing that really is critical. Well, there are 2 things that are really critical. And I'm going to publish an article about those probably next week. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you, a sneak preview. But the 2 other things are spare parts. Yeah, because I know what's broken, but if I don't have the part, I get downtime. And the other one is information. I mean, that really, if I have the spare parts, I know it's broken, and I can probably figure out where it's broken. I even have a trained service engineer or mechanic, and I have the spare parts, but I don't know how to disassemble the machine in order to replace the parts. The other things are just useless. Mm-hmm. So you really need that knowledge as integral as, if you did a Venn diagram, they'd all overlap equally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the way I thought about it was, I was thinking a lot about it from the service provider point of view, right? What are the areas they have to keep in mind, focus on, make sure that they understand about their own business to be able to optimize it in a way and restructure it in a way that they can make that leap towards the outcomes-based service business model, right?
Right.
The outcome of that is the value that the customer is getting, and that would be the whole, right? The customer doesn't care if you need the drill for that, or if you're going to use some new sci-fi tool that never existed before, right?
Right.
Or a dynamite to blow that hole, right?
Right.
So that's where it all meets together. And when I thought about it, and you already touched it in the very beginning, it sounds to me that for the businesses who want to make that switch towards outcomes-based services, it's a lot dependent on data, right? Like they have to have a lot of sources of data to make that switch. Would that be correct?
I think a lot is an understatement.
Mm-hmm.
It's the data is the foundation. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a matter of the data is very hard to figure out. First of all, you've got to figure out what you're trying to accomplish and what you need to measure in order to make sure that you're going to get what you need. And that's not so easy. And the more complex the equipment is and the more complex what you're trying to do is, it gets really tough. And then there's the whole, okay, I got a bucket of data. What do I do with it? Well, you say, okay, I'm going to ship it up to a computer and they'll process it. And maybe they'll process it with AI and with machine learning, and that's great, but you have to worry about data security. And you have to worry about, well, how do I transmit the data? You know, I'm in the basement of the hospital with my MRI, and there's no Wi-Fi down here. And they won't let my equipment be put on the hospital network because somehow your technician is going to want to violate HIPAA rules, you know? And so, yeah, the data and its transmission and use is really what the advanced servitization really is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's clicking in my head right now. So are there any other barriers that you can think of when it comes to embracing the outcomes-based service model? We talk about, yeah, you need to be ready, you need to have a lot of data. A lot is an understatement, right?
Right.
What are some other barriers?
Yeah, there's you need the history. You to make sure that the data that you're going to collect is really relevant, and that takes a lot of experience. I mean, I can give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
I recently met on LinkedIn a gentleman in Cologne, Germany, and we haven't yet spoken because we were going to, and he said, but I'm going into a new job on the 1st of the year, and I'd like to talk with you after that. And his job, his title, I wrote it down because I don't want to mess it up too bad, but his title is Manager, Rotation as a Service and Product Management at SKF, which is a giant multinational company that specializes in bearings.
Mm-hmm.
And he is going to head up a group of consultants that are selling and supporting rotation as a service. Just like the Rolls-Royce guys were with thrust as a service is what they were selling. And so he's doing rotation. And so they're getting into this now, even though they've been in business probably for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's technically it's a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. So could we describe it as maybe like the legacy of the old systems or equipment and machinery?
That's also a part of the challenges, but the real big one is knowing what to do. And it took SKF until 2022 to figure out we know how to do this for our type of products, and we're going to commercialize it. And they hadn't done that before. Once they've got that, then it's a fork in the road. One fork is, how do I do it on new equipment? and build it in and sell it straight away. But the other fork is, how do we retrofit old equipment, the legacy equipment?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're really concerned about your factory uptime, taking care of the new stuff is not quite as critical maybe as taking care of the old stuff, which is more likely to fail first anyway.
Yeah.
So you're right. Those are really obstacles. Another obstacle is change and implementing change in organizations. That is the what people who fail in these kinds of projects always point to as change. Now, I don't know if that's really a truth or not, but it's a convenient excuse that everybody would buy. But change management and explaining to people that what they've always done, we always ran the machine till it broke. Well, we're not going to do that now. We're going to monitor this data, and the machine's going to tell us when it's time to grease the fittings and to lubricate clean the engine and change the oil and all that. Well, why do I don't trust the machine. I know how to do it, and I've done it and that's the big change is the challenge of all kinds of transformations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's tough.
I have one more here.
Okay.
Complex equipment.
The complex equipment is complex.
Yeah.
And if you think about instrumentation, you got to instrument this stuff so you can measure. One of the things that are commonly measured, especially in rotary equipment, is acceleration. Because that's when something gets slightly out of round, it makes funny noises, it grinds, it bounces, and it changes the vibration pattern. But if you were trying to monitor, let's say, all the bearings on all the rollers even in a 10 feet section of conveyor, then the vibrations interact with each other, and trying to separate out which frequency is coming from which specific bearing, and then to figure out, okay, I have to change this one. That's tough. That really is tough. Now think about doing that on the vibrations in an airplane, where you have 2 or 4 jet engines running at slightly different frequencies and different oscillations, and the wings and the tail and the body. It's really complex stuff. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
It's even the simple stuff is not so easy.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me to maybe the last question. Any recommendations you can give to companies who are considering maybe taking some steps towards becoming an outcomes-based service business? And I know it's a big one and a broad one, but
yeah, we got to do it for the audience. I know. I think the very first thing that if you're thinking about implementing especially these predictive maintenance things in your factory, the first step is to talk with IT. You have to get the IT infrastructure in place. You have to have an architecture that will allow different sensors running through different control systems to all share with a local computer. The word they use is edge computing, and that consolidates the data and then ships it up into the cloud, maybe to an Amazon Web Service or somebody else. And you want to be able to, once you've got this infrastructure for what you think you're going to do, you then have to make it general, make sure that the next machine that comes in will also fit in the infrastructure. And so IT is really a critical player in the whole thing.
mm-hmm.
And once they're on board and once they they know what they're doing, and they can work with you, and they say, okay, now let's go think about which ones we're going to do first. Then you have to figure out which is my most critical piece of equipment. Which one, if it breaks, is going to cause us the most damage in our production process.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to work with, once you've got that established, then you have to work with somebody. Ideally, it's the OEM, but it may not be, because the OEM may be too small and the equipment too specialized, and you have to go find someone who does this kind of work to study the equipment, understand what's there, what could break, and how to instrument that. And once you get those three things done, then you could really start using the data to improve your outcomes.
That's great.
But just got to remember one more thing.
Okay.
Once you get the first one done, then then when somebody asks you which machine would break down and really mess up your production, well, it's not the one you just did, because that's not going to break down. There's a new one that's the top constraint. So it really is a cycle. And eventually you come to the point of either I've done every machine, or I've done enough that anything more is probably unlikely to cause us any damage. But it's part of the process. So it's the IT, then the vendor, and then for IT critical resource, the vendor, and then recycle to the next critical resource.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I think that's something that we can take home and think about, right?
I hope so, because it's hard. It's hard work.
But the recommendations you gave, I think, are clearly actionable.
Good.
That's awesome. Sam, I think we just crossed 30 minutes, and I say let's wrap it up here. And you were kind enough to agree that we will do some more things together in the future.
I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome, me too. Before we get there, where can our listeners reach out to you?
The easiest way is LinkedIn, or you can go to my website, or just email me at sam@middlesexconsulting.com, or send me a text at my mobile phone is 774-217-4247, and let's start talking.
Start a conversation. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Sam, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for spending the last 30 minutes talking with me, or to me, about the outcomes-based service. And I look forward to catching up with you in the near future.
Great. Thank you, Ivan.
Take care. Bye.
You too.